Okay, welcome everyone to the Rotary Club of Coronado for February 1st. And first thing out, welcoming all of our members and all of our special guests. And I want to have everyone for the tech unit, please refrain from using the facilities Wi-Fi because it actually pulls a little bit too much for all the equipment. So just make sure that you're not using the Wi-Fi for the whole meeting. Okay, thank you. So let's do our inspirational invocation and pledge if everyone would stand. And we have Ronnie Hosler coming up, and as Ronnie's coming up, I have to apologize. I probably mispronounced her last name at least 50 times. So I think I finally got it right. So here's Ronnie.
I was looking through the book and I found that community was the thing that stuck out for me the most. Even though there are miles of land and tall mountains, oceans between, every person is part of a single worldwide community called humankind. Ideally, no matter how we are separated, we all have our opportunity to contribute good works to this world as a united people. In getting to know the awesome group of Rotary International, I have found that their actions and goals exemplify this altruistic intention and progresses the concept with every human it touches and every service it provides. A community of which I'm proud to belong. I would like to leave you with this quote. This is from Steve Jobs, who quoted or sent this quote to himself. I grow little of the food I eat. I do not make any of my own clothing. I speak a language I did not invent or refine. I do not discover the mathematics I use. I am protected by freedoms and laws I did not conceive of and do not enforce. I am moved by music I did not create. I did not invent the transistor, the microprocessor, object-oriented programming, or most of the technology I work with. I love and admire my species, the living and the dead. I'd like everybody to join in the pledge, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ronnie. Next, we have our visiting Rotarians and guests. And if past President Dan Orr wants to come on up, and I can say welcome back to the podium, Dan. And we're all glad that you're in one piece and that you're recovering. So it's good to see you.
Thank you, President Luann. All right, we have two people that found us. One denies a classification. From the Oceanside Rotary, please welcome Mike Curtin. And in community service from the Carlsbad High Noon Club, Tracy Carmichael. Hi, Tracy. Do we have any other that snuck in here without me seeing them? All right, in that case, we have guests of Rotarians, of which I have the first and finest. The lovely, gracious, and sainted Mrs. Orr, my wife, Kathy.
She gets a double thank you for all of this. Yeah.
It's not funny. Any other guests of Rotarians?
I've got one real quick. John Jacobson right here is a special guest.
John?
Fellow Rotarians and President Luann, I've got my special guest, Brenda Jones here. She's moved to Coronado recently from Sydney, Australia.
I'm not sure whether I address ex-President Dan or current President Luann. President Luann. President Luann and fellow Rotarians guests, I'm very pleased to introduce my wife, Jo.
President Land, fellow Rotarians, already introduced, but I want to give a little background on my two guests.
First is Mike Curtin from the Oceanside Club, twice past president of his club and five times this district governor assistant. So joining us today, and also, what's that? Yep, assistant. And also Tracy Carmichael, who's from the High Noon Carlsbad Club, and she is joining us today. They both had active campaigns for their respective city governments, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Hi, Mrs. Clinker. President Luann, Dan, fellow Rotarians and guests, I'd like to introduce my special guest, Rena Clancy, who you guys saw last week. And my other guest, who's actually a visiting Rotarian from another club, who doesn't like to admit it, Richard Bailey. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And then anybody on Zoom that is visiting Rotarian or has a guest, if you want to unmute yourself. Okay, I think we're good. So next, as we always do, we introduce and have stand up our red badgers. So I think if you please stand up, Sarah Cheverton's right here. Ronnie Hostler's right there. Jerry Brown is here, is back there. Joe Malloy right here. Arlene Inch, Arlene's over here. Georgia Farrell, I don't know if there's Georgia, okay. And Carrie Siegenthaler is right there. I don't think I missed anybody. If I did, all right. So, oh, I forgot Sully. You're right. Can never forget Sully. No. Then if you all realize that at the reserve new member at each place, that is for Red Badger, or it is for someone that's a new member, say in the last year and a half. So it just kind of recognizes those people. It saves a spot at your table, and, you know, please have a conversation with them. So next, if we can do the announcement slide, and then while I'm waiting for that, if you'll notice the Coronado Rotary Thank You Board is back again, and just take a peek at that when you leave. It's just all of the people that have thanked us for donations and so on. Okay, so I can't see, is that up? Okay. We're having the February Rotary Social. It's going to be at Doug St. Dennis's house on Thursday, February 9th. It's from 5:30 to 7:30, and it's at 1504 Parkview Place. It is going to be the first time Doug wanted to do a whiskey tasting. So I know there's going to be a lot of people coming to that one, but still bring an adult beverage and appetizer to share. So she's going to announce that next week. Beach cleanup, Saturday, February 11th. Flags on the Avenue, there'll be President's Day, Monday, February 20th. The golf tournament, don't forget that, Friday, March 31st. Then just so everybody knows, upcoming is Rotarian at Work Day, and that's Saturday, April 29th. Also, beginning of February for Rotary International and all Rotary clubs is Peace and Conflict Resolution Month. And on February 15th, that meeting, we're going to have a special meeting honoring all that. Then I wanted to announce one more thing. Feed the Needy Committee, we announced it last week, is active. They're accepting volunteers. So they're going to Father Joe's to serve breakfast on April 12th and November 15th. So if you're interested in that, see Mary or Bob Griffin. Okay, so next, Ronnie is here. She's going to do her Rotary Minute for us. You did the Rotary Minute with that? Oh, okay. She's up on me. One up on me. All right. So then, guess I can skip that one. And we'll go next to, if everybody saw, it's Rotarians Out and About. If everybody saw the 365 magazine, it's a really nice article on Kit and Richard Williams and all their awards that they've done and they're running. And I mean, what an amazing job. So congratulations on that. Okay, and then the next, if you saw the Coronado Times, if you saw the district news bits, and if you've seen today's Eagle, they had quite a few articles that showcased a lot of the things that we do. One of them was donating the food and the clothing that we've done for the pantry at an Imperial Beach. And the next was the Rotary Peace Scholar, Nancy Nguyen, that spoke to us that's leaving for Australia. And then the Flags on the Avenue. There was an article in the Eagles today. There's an even nicer article in the Coronado Times. So I really want to thank Sharon Rapper and Kit Williams for writing those articles. They did an amazing job. And also to our PR committee, they kind of divvy up the articles and they do a really good job on that. Okay, so what we're going to do next, I'm gonna make sure I've got this right. We're going to have a special presentation. And if Ronnie wants to help me, we have to set this up. This is like moving furniture in your living room. That sounds like me. Okay, so on this, I want to, it doesn't happen that often that we have a very special guest. So today, please welcome from Hollywood, our own Debbie McMahon.
President Luann, fellow Rotarians and guests, we are so honored today to have from Burbank, California, Johnny Carson Show, the know all, the see all, the one, the only, Karnak the Magnificent. Karnak Magnificent. I said Karnak the Magnificent. Karnak. Oh, wait, Karnak, just a minute. Thank you, President Luann.
Yes, thank you, President Lulu. You are a Lulu, President.
So,
Yes.
Karnak,
Yes.
I give you the first envelope.
The first envelope. $180. 180.
180. 180.
Does anybody wish to supply the question for that answer? How about you over there, sir? How many flags are put on Orange Avenue for Flags on the Avenue events? Very good.
Karnak,
Yes, my dear.
I give you envelope number 2.
Envelope number 2. Thank you, my dear. Who is Coronado's longest living Rotarian?
Who is Coronado's longest living Rotarian?
No volunteers?
How about Lionel?
Do I hear any answers?
Lionel.
Who is Ron Bobian?
Barnett. I give you envelope number 3.
Envelope number 3. Coronado, California. Coronado Rotarian. Bob Watson.
Coronado, California. Coronado Rotarian. Bob Watson.
No answers, huh? Rotarians at Workday. Where did International Rotarians at Work start and who was the starter? Very good.
Barnett. I give you envelope number 4.
Envelope number 4. A rough, tough bodyguard for Burt Reynolds.
A rough, tough bodyguard for Burt Reynolds.
No one?
Luann Miller.
Who answered that? Let's see. What was one of the many things President Luann did before joining Rotary?
Barnett. Envelope number 5.
Envelope number 5. $180.
180.
Sir?
Karnak, I think you're confused. We've already done that because it's a number of flags that Rotary puts up on flags on the avenue, 180. I know.
I'm sorry, sir, you're incorrect. How many flags are taken down on Orange Avenue for flags on the avenue?
Barnett. Envelope number 6.
Envelope number 6. March 31st.
March
No one?
31st.
No one? How about you, sir? Is that it, sir, or did you? Sir? Is that all you had to say?
Here, wait a minute.
Last time I said anything, it cost me $100. So my solution today, would you hold the microphone for me? My solution today is not to make a comment about the football game.
It's just a show it off. I'm sorry, one moment. This is something. It's coming from Luann. Your president, Luann. Yes, President Luann said to say, sir, that will cost you $100. And to check on your answer, sir. Your answer is incorrect. The proper question is, when is Cesar Chavez Day?
Barnett, envelope number 7.
Envelope number 7. Suzanne Pop.
My roommate.
She is the first lady president of this club.
No, I'm sorry, you are both wrong. Who is responsible for the ban on hard dinner rolls at Coronado Rotary functions?
Barnett,
Yes.
envelope number 8.
Envelope number 8. Number 8 is 4. 4?
4.
No one?
Bob,
What is the yell that you hear before I take the first tee at the Coronado Rotary Charity Golf Tournaments?
No, the answer would be, oh my God, and that. But how many tests are there in the 4-way test?
Barnett,
Yes.
envelope number 9.
Envelope number 9. You can't.
You can't.
No. How do you tell the difference between a Coronado Rotarian of the Year and a Masters golf champion?
Barnett, envelope number 10. It was funny to start with.
8 foot, 2 inches.
8 foot, 2 inches.
I feel another message from President Luann. How high is the Coronado Rotary podium?
I didn't do it. Barnett, envelope number 11.
Envelope number 11. Dan Orr. Dan Orr. Who wrote the book, 105 Ways to Crash Your Bike?
Okay. Carnegie, envelope number 12.
Daniel Stewart. Who's the Coronado Rotary tree climbing champion, unchallenged to this day?
Carnegie,
Yes.
this is the last envelope.
The last envelope. (1993), Ed Lowline.
1993, Ed Lowline.
Yeah.
When did Rotary start?
What year was Coronado Rotary founded, and who was the founder?
Thank you all. Thank you all.
Get rid of all this. No. Okay, next time for our speaker and to introduce our speaker, Natalie Bailey.
I don't know how our speaker is going to follow that up. All right. So most of us know our speaker as my boyfriend, and a few of you might know him as the mayor of Coronado. Even fewer are likely aware of his pursuits as an endurance athlete. From dozens of marathons, triathlons, and multi-day stage races covering 120 miles in the Colorado Rockies, Richard is always signing up for the next thing. Most recently, Richard has entered the sport of high mountain climbing, and this past January climbed the tallest mountain outside of the Himalayas, Aconcagua. A 23,000-foot mountain that is the tallest in the Western Hemisphere. Later this spring, Richard will attempt to become the first person ever to finish the Boston Marathon and summit Mount Everest in the same year. So I will have a lot of spare time. Beer Club every Wednesday. Here to talk about everything that goes into climbing big mountains and why anyone would ever do that is the mayor of Coronado and my boyfriend, Richard Bailey.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Someone was asking at our table, are you guys related? Not quite, not quite. Well, hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Usually when I'm addressing a service organization, we're talking municipal bonds or SANDAG or housing element compliance. So if I sound a little more enthusiastic today, it's because I'm even more passionate about this latest sport I got into of mountaineering. Many of you, I'm sure, have gone on long hikes and climb maybe up to 14,000 feet. 14,500 feet is approximately the height of Mount Whitney. So I know many of us in this room probably have some familiarity with doing pretty high climbing or hiking, maybe in the Sierra Nevadas. And today, what I'd like to share with you is kind of demystifying what it takes to actually go to the next level. In mountaineering, mountains are commonly referred to by their height, starting at 6,000 meters, 7,000 meters, and then 8,000 meters. of which there are 14 peaks in the world that are taller than 8,000 meters. Luann Miller informed me that she had sent out an email recommending a documentary on Netflix called 14 Peaks. I'm curious, show of hands, who here has seen the movie 14 Peaks? All right, quite a few of you. Okay, so there'll be some references to that movie throughout this presentation. Is it working? All right, it's a great sign. All right, so my objective at the end of this presentation is to pretty much give you all the tools that you would need to make the decision for yourself to go ahead and summit one of those 8,000 meter peaks later this spring. And if you're not interested in summiting those peaks, at least at the end of this presentation, you'll have a better idea of what goes into it. So we're going to cover all the basics, starting with the gear necessary to actually climb these peaks. Then we'll move on to the decision of whether or not to have a support team with you or do these mountains solo. We'll then go to what it takes, or excuse me, why does it take 4 weeks to climb a distance of anywhere from like 10 to 12 miles? You might be surprised to learn that the distance from, say, Everest Base Camp to the summit of Mount Everest is only about 11.5 to 12 miles, yet it takes 4 to 5 weeks to climb. So we'll explain why it takes so long to climb these high mountains. We'll talk about some of the risks associated with climbing, and then we will go ahead and together, all of us virtually from right here in this room, we will go ahead and summit Aconcagua, the tallest mountain outside of the Himalayas, in about 2 minutes. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into talking about the gear. I went ahead and brought the boots I use for this climb. I'm going to pass them around. Careful, they're really sharp, but it'll kind of give you an idea of just the quality of the gear that's necessary to go into these mountains. So I'll start on this table. Feel free to pass them around, but please be careful. Like, the crampons are extremely sharp. And Ray, is it okay if I move forward? Will the microphone work, or it will? About this close. Is this okay for everyone? Yes? Good? Okay. All right, so I'll move over here. So when you move from, say, 14,000 feet high to 20,000 feet high, there's a really big difference in the quality of gear that you need. If you're going up to a 14,000 foot peak, if any of you have done Mount Whitney before or climbed in the Sierras, you can get through a lot of the season with simply some trail running shoes or some high quality boots, and heck, even just running shorts and a tank top during some parts of the season. When you get to higher altitude, you really have to take into account the conditions you're going to experience, most notably the cold and the wind. So starting with the gear here, you can see that this woman here, she's a climber I follow on Instagram. She had this great picture that I think does a great job kind of showing off all of the gear that's necessary going to these 8,000 meter peaks. You can see here, the most notable piece of gear here is the summit suit. This is a suit that you will wear usually from around 23,000 feet or so, all the way up to the summit. It has a 800 fill proof down, very, very durable suit. This protects you from the elements. You also have usually anywhere from 3 to 4 different types of gloves that you bring on your trip. The summit glove here will cost you about $250 to $300. It is incredibly, incredibly warm. However, you wouldn't want to wear this down at base camp. So you have your liner gloves and you kind of have your mid-mount gloves. So you usually have 3 to 4 different pairs of gloves. You also, let's see where it's depicted here. You also have your crampons. Crampons are necessary, especially when you're going over hard ice, to make sure you can maintain your footing. And there are usually multiple sleeping bags you bring. And these sleeping bags are typically rated from negative 20 degrees to negative 40 degrees. And you usually bring 2 of them. We'll get into the prices of all this in a little bit. And then you also have your ice axe, your hiking poles, your helmet, and then several water bottles. We'll get into that in a little bit. And then you can't leave home without a pee bottle. And we'll get into that in just a little bit. That might be the most important piece of equipment. So how much does all of this cost? Excellent. There we go. There we go. All right. So how much does all of this gear cost? So for all of you in this room that are interested in getting into the sport of mountaineering, it is kind of a high barrier to entry associated with the price tag of all this equipment. Starting with the Summit suit, you're looking at spending about $1,500. You can't get away without a Summit suit though, so you have to bring a Summit suit. Summit boots, the boots going around here, you're looking at about $1,400. The sleeping bag itself, the highest rated sleeping bag for your -40 degrees, you're looking at another $1,000, and so on and so forth. You really can't get away without any of this equipment without compromising the integrity or the safety of your client. So if you're in, you're all in. Total price tag you're looking at for all of the equipment just necessary to get to the top of one of these 8,000 meter peaks is approximately $8,000. Anyone recognize the gentleman on the right? Yeah, where do you recognize him from? 14 Peaks, exactly. That is NIMS. We're going to talk about NIMS in just a little bit. All right, so we have why all the gear. So this is a video. This video you're seeing here is from Camp 2 at Aconcagua. We'll go through it in more detail as we kind of climb Aconcagua in just a few minutes here. Why all the gear? Because of the elements. When you're at this high of altitude, you do not know what the weather is going to be, but you do know that it has the possibility of the wind being very severe and the cold being very, very cold. On this particular day, when we were at Camp 2, the wind got up to over 60 miles per hour. We were absolutely buried in snow, and there was one point where we couldn't leave our tent for over 15 hours just because the weather is so severe. Brings me back to the most important piece of gear, the pee bottle. When you're in these situations, you're also sharing a tent with another individual. So when you spend 15 straight hours in a tent, a very small tent with someone else, you make a good friend. So why all the gear? To protect yourself from elements like these. It's one thing if you're in a tent, so you can get by just hanging out in your sleeping bag. But if this storm comes through when you're in the middle of a 21-hour summit day, you need to have the appropriate gear to protect yourself. All right, so next question then. Climbing solo or climbing with a team? Here on this slide is a picture of our entire team. We had a total of 16 climbers from all around the world. We also had 4 guides, 4 porters, and then the leader of our expedition, which was NIMS, who was also in 14 Peaks. So I was very fortunate to be able to have NIMS as our expedition leader. What are some reasons to climb with a team versus solo? Well, if you're climbing solo, you're responsible for bringing everything up on your own. Your food, your water, your tent. You're also responsible for figuring out what to do if things go wrong. You're also responsible for figuring out, all right, how do we get from base camp to Camp 1 to Camp 2? What is the weather supposed to look like? So it's a lot of responsibility to put on the shoulders of one individual. If you have a team, those responsibilities are shared throughout the group. So what I found to be some of the biggest benefits of climbing with NIMS and his team, obviously he had great experience, so climbing with the best, having that peace of mind, having team members actually help prepare the meals so you don't actually have to haul up all of your food. Water purification was also really big, so having someone else responsible solely for making sure that we are adequately supplied with our hydration. Weather forecasting, toilets, stool hauling. Yes, that is exactly what it sounds like. If you go in there solo, you better be coming out with your own stuff. Otherwise, you're likely to be fined. Now, the price tag for summiting, say a mountain like Everest, if you do it solo, you can usually get away with somewhere between $35,000 and $40,000. That money goes to paying for all the permits and then your accommodations at base camp. If you're going with the team, it is significantly more expensive. Summiting a mountain like Everest can range from, like I said, on the low end, $35,000 to $40,000 if you're going by yourself, all the way up to $100,000 plus. If anyone is interested in summiting with NIMS himself, he does do one-on-one guiding up Everest. It is, anyone want to take a guess how much it is? What's that? 120? No, not you. If anyone is interested, it's $200,000 for a one-on-one guide with NIMS. Granted, he is the absolute best in the world. All right, so why does it take so long to go such a short distance? As I mentioned earlier, a mountain as tall as Everest, where you start off at base camp at 17,500 feet. The summit is just over 29,000 feet. So you're basically covering 11,500 feet of elevation over roughly 12 miles. 12 miles, like that's not a long distance. Why does it take so long to summit something like Everest? What was that? Acclimation. Absolutely. Something that's not well known about mountaineering, because if you watch 14 Peaks or you see any other documentaries about climbing in the Himalayas, what you tend to see are all the action shots of people actually moving and climbing and rescuing one another and the storms they're rolling, etc. Something that's not as fun to show on documentaries and TVs and movies is how much downtime there actually is, where your body is literally just resting and adjusting to the altitude. Right now, we're at sea level. If we were to go to Everest Base Camp has roughly 33% less oxygen than we do here at sea level. And at the summit, it has half the oxygen we have here at sea level. So if we were to transport ourselves from here in Coronado all the way to the summit of Everest, we would pass out and die within just a few minutes. So the reason it takes so long to climb such a short distance is because how the climbing itinerary looks, and we'll get into that in just a little bit, is you're climbing up, usually spending the night at a higher elevation, and then climbing back down and resting. And then you repeat that. Camp 1, then to Camp 2, rest, then come on back down. Then go up to Camp 1, Camp 2, Camp 3, spend the night, come on back down. Take a few days off and then do it all over again. So that's why it takes so long. All right, so we're preparing for Aconcagua, okay? We have all of our gear. We just all dropped $8,000. Thank you, Rotary funds. We decided to go with Nims because he's the best in the world. So we got our team together. And now we're going to review our itinerary for summiting this mountain. So we're going to take a flight on down to Mendoza. We're going to do a gear check. So you'll have a guide actually come through to your room, inspect all of the gear you've brought. Because once you're on the mountain, you're not getting any new gear. So what you come with is what you got. So we'll do a gear check there. Spend the night one more night in Mendoza. We'll drive ourselves to the trailhead over in over just about 3 hours west of Mendoza. Then we're going to start our hiking. Our first hike is to preliminary base camp, not quite the base camp, but a preliminary base camp. That'll be at about roughly 8,000 or 9,000 feet. Spend the night there. Next day, we'll do an acclimatization hike. We'll go climb about 4,000 or 5,000 feet in elevation, hang out for a few hours, come on down to that preliminary camp. From there, we'll go ahead and hike roughly 10 hours all the way to base camp. At base camp, that is where our home will be for the next 2 weeks. And then once we're at base camp, that is when we begin the up to Camp 1, drop off our gear, come on down, spend the night. Up to Camp 1 again on day 9, grab the gear we just dropped off, transport it even higher to Camp 2, spend the night and leave it there, and then come on back down. So we'll repeat that all the way until summit day. And summit day, we're expecting somewhere between a 20-hour and 36-hour nonstop day, and then we'll come home and celebrate. All right, so before we begin, now we know the itinerary, let's talk about some of the risks associated with the sport. Every single person that has ever done this, you're going to experience a headache. You have to get used and comfortable with the idea that you will almost constantly have at least a mild headache, just slightly irritating you. Frost nip, that's what you get right before frostbite. After frost nip, a lot of folks will experience frostbite. Some of the other risks, severe injuries from a fall, avalanche, freak storms, rockfall, falling through a crevasse, high altitude pulmonary edema, high altitude cerebral edema, and then death. So those are some of the risks. You guys have all been warned. Quick story for you. My lovely girlfriend, dentist Natalie Bailey, and I, we had a good fortune. We were able to go hike to Everest Base Camp a couple of years ago. And a big reason, a big motivator for me of doing this stuff is just to know whether or not I have what it takes to do it. Like if I'm being honest with myself, that's where a lot of the motivation comes from. And so we're at base camp. We have no plans to go to the summit. Base camp was our final destination. And but there was a Sherpa there at base camp, and he spoke pretty good English. And so I asked him, I said, hey, what does it take to get to the top? Like, do I have what it takes? Like, that's what I want to know. Do I have what it takes? And the Sherpa just kind of looked at me, gave me like an up down, and he said, yeah, you look like you're in pretty good shape as long as the avalanche, the rock fall, the crevasses, and the freak storms don't get you. You should be fine. Like, like, all right, it's good to know. All right. So we got our gear, we got our team, we got our itinerary. Let's go ahead and summit Aconcagua in 2 minutes. This is the orientation. Mayor Mendoza came out and greeted us, so I got to meet Mayor Mendoza. This is the start of the trailhead. Notice the scenery here is going to change from some light vegetation up to just rocks, up to just snow in a pretty short order. This is us hiking to our first base camp. Mules were utilized to carry a lot of our gear to base camp. This is the preliminary camp. That's our first bathroom, the shed with no ceiling. More mules carrying more of our stuff further up the mountain. Most of the climbing you do starts at night. So, or excuse me, very early in the morning. It's around anywhere from 1 a.m. to 4 a.m. There's another bathroom on the bottom there. It's just in the middle of nowhere. So our third bathrooms, sheds again. It's recurring theme. Everyone's interested in the toilets when you're up there. We have these large dome structures that we all eat in as communal tents at base camp. View of the base camp from the top, excuse me, from around Camp 1. There's our bucket full of purified water. That's where we got all of our water from. Making sure that stayed clean was really important. This is on our way to Camp 1. Last bathroom we had. This is on our way to Camp 2. It's my roommate Kyle for 15 hours in one tent. The 60-mile-per-hour winds coming through Camp 2 that kind of kept us there for longer than we were hoping. It's right before summit push, and then this is actually on the summit. And all right, so congratulations, everyone. Most of us just summited Aconcagua in about 2 minutes. What makes every mountain and every expedition unique is that this mountain here, for example, during many seasons is very dry. And there are some seasons where it can be very dry and relatively warm with very little wind. You could, in some seasons, get to the top of Aconcagua in nothing more than trail shoes, shorts, and like a light windbreaker in some seasons. It was not the case for this season. In this season, about a week before we arrived, they just got absolutely pounded with snow. While we were there, we got pounded with snow. So we were up knee deep in snow for a lot of the climb. Got hit with a few snowstorms, which adds to the adventure. Like in hindsight, like after you're through it, you're like, oh, so glad we had those elements because it made for a greater adventure. It made it more challenging. So we started with 16 climbers. One climber in our group had to drop out due to altitude sickness. Actually, my apologies.
This is the hardest thing I've ever done.
This is from one of our British climbers, Dan. And if you couldn't really hear it in his muffled voice, he was saying that this was one of the hardest things he'd ever had it done. And Dan was a phenomenal athlete. So there's our summit picture with 4 of the 16 climbers in our group. So let's talk about what actually happened on this particular trip. So we had our climbing team that had 16 climbers, and then we had we had one other group that was not led by NIMS, but part of the same expedition that was a couple days behind us. We had a total of 32 climbers as part of our expedition. 20 of the 32 climbers reached the summit. The typical summit success rate for this mountain is somewhere between 30 and 40%. All climbers experience some levels of hallucinations, myself included. There was a time coming down from the summit's just under 23,000 feet. Coming down from the summit, myself and one other team member were in the very front of the pack, and we're kind of coming down on our own. We were probably at around 20,000 feet in altitude, and we were taking a break, pretty much just making snow angels on this pretty steep terrain because we were so exhausted. And we're looking out and we're seeing this like beautiful view of the Andes mountain range. I would have put my hand on a Bible and sworn to you that I saw like ancient ruins on these mountain ranges that were out ahead of us. And so I asked my friend that was sitting next to me, his name was Kenny. I asked him, what are those? He's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, those over there, like it looked like the Pantheon. It was amazing. He said, what are you talking about? Close my eyes, wait a few seconds, open it, nothing's there. I then asked him, where are we? Because if I had to get that answer correctly, like if my life depended on getting that answer correctly, I had no clue. I could not have told you we were in Argentina. I could not have told you we were on the Mount Aconcagua. I just didn't know. And so you notice that your brain just works very differently at higher altitude. I'm fortunate that I had some experience leading into this climb where even going through that, I was kind of prepared. Okay, I know my mind's not going to be working perfectly. I just need to focus on getting the basics of this correct. So all climbers experience some hallucinations. Several climbers experience frostnip. One of our climbers experienced pretty severe frostbite and lost part of his ear. Sad note, and I share this because it kind of puts things in perspective. Like it's really easy when a trip is over to look back and say, what a fun adventure. Like, we could go do that again tomorrow. One of the climbers in the group immediately behind us, unfortunately, near the summit, fell about 300 feet, suffered severe compound fractures. His helmet fell off during his fall. He fractured his head, and ultimately his leg required an amputation, and he's still in Mendoza right now. So I share that because it's a dangerous sport. Like it's a very dangerous sport. I'd mentioned earlier the decision between going solo or going with the team. There was a climber there, not affiliated with our group, but that had made the decision to go solo. I believe he was from Japan. He was there by himself. And once you get a permit, no one's going to stop you going up the mountain. This gentleman attempted to go up the mountain. Summit takes anywhere, like I mentioned, somewhere between 20 and 36 hours, depending on your abilities. This gentleman went up the mountain, and about 12 hours after he started going, making his summit push, a large storm rolled in, and no one has seen or heard from him since, but he never checked out of the park during the weeks we were there. And so once again, like many of the accidents that occur in high altitude mountaineering are due to either a lack of gear, a lack of training, a lack of understanding about your own body and abilities, or just really a lack of preparation. Like there's no reason he should have disappeared. If he had bothered to check the weather forecast, he would have known there'd be a large snowstorm coming in. He would have waited a day, like pretty much everyone else did. All right, so why do it? Why do it? John Krakauer had a great quote. He said something to the effect of, let's not mince words. High mountain climbing does not attract the most well-balanced people. And there are many other quotes along that line. I have, as I shared with you earlier, I know one of the motivations for me is just deep down wanting to know if I have what it takes to do it. That's the driving force for me. But there's a couple other quotes that kind of resonated with me. Quote, the stresses of high altitude climbing reveal your true character. They unmask who you really are. You no longer have all the social graces to hide behind, to play roles. You are the essence of what you are. One of the neat parts about this experience for me is that when you're on the mountain, nothing else matters other than, do I have shelter? Do I have food? Do I have water? Am I going to be able to get down in one piece? And so you kind of strip away all of what we enjoy like in the modern day, and you get back to like the basics. And there's something very exciting to that for me. And then the last quote, there was this gentleman, George Mallory, who was one of the early explorers in the Himalayas. And he tried for many, many years to find a path to summit Everest, unsuccessfully, over and over again. And he just kept going back and just kept going back. He was asked by a reporter, why do you need to do this so badly? And his response was, because it's there. It's just part of the human spirit. Unfortunately, he passed away on the mound just a couple hundred feet short of the summit, and his body was recovered about 40 years later. Like one of my friends likes to remind me in jest, every dead climber was once a very motivated person, which, not to make light of it, but I'm sure none of them would disagree. So anyways, hope that kind of like demystifies some of the elements of high altitude mountaineering, and thank you guys very much for having me.
We've got a couple of minutes. If you want to give a mic.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I enjoyed it very much. I don't have a question. I have an observation. Dr. Bailey babysat my children when she lived across the street on San Luis Rey. So I'm cautioning you to be very careful. I don't want her to be distressed. Thank you.
I should have mentioned the other thing you need when you're climbing high mountains is a very understanding significant other. So she is that.
So
Yes, Steph?
I'm wondering, the Japanese guy or those of us that might go missing going up to the summit, does anyone come look for you, or are you just kind of on your own?
The short answer to that is maybe. If you're on a team and you go missing, someone is definitely coming to get you. That's part of the reason you go with the team. Since he did pull permits with the park rangers, once the conditions allow, they will go up and do a search party for him. However, it's a big mountain. And if you don't necessarily know exactly where you're going, the search and rescue folks aren't going to know where to begin. They'll begin on the most like obvious path from, base camp all the way to the summit. But if you've deviated from that, it can be really tough to find you, especially if there's been a lot of snow.
Thank you. It was marvelous trying to get away from there. Can you tell me on the high altitude, but how many calories a day would you burn, and how heavy is the equipment that you're putting on the strain on your body?
Great question. So on summit day, for myself and my counterpart, we were kind of teamed together. It took us a total of 21 hours, pretty much straight, to go from camp 2 up to the summit and back down. And on that day, we burned, he was monitoring it. He burned 14,000 calories. And then in terms of the gear you're carrying, the gear actually gets lighter and lighter as you go. And the reason it gets lighter and lighter as you go is because when you start at base camp, you have all your gear with you, your summit suits, your big heavy boots, your sleeping bag, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And as part of your acclimatization rounds, you're depositing that gear at the camps where you will then come back and pick it up. So on summit day, actually, your bag is pretty darn light because you're wearing the summit suit, which will protect you from the element. My backpack on summit day probably didn't weigh more than 12, 15 pounds. And the reason for that is because I was wearing everything, and it only had in there a lot of water and a lot of nutrition. Yes. In what way? Yeah.
You got ropes and stuff coming down. What's it like coming down?
Coming down is a phenomenal experience because, especially if it's been a successful summit. I should have mentioned, so this whole trek took me roughly 2 weeks to get from base camp to the summit. And the summit day was 21 hours. I spent a total of maybe 3 minutes at the summit, maybe 3 minutes. Coming down was phenomenal because every step you take coming down, the air gets just a little bit thicker. Like you can feel your mind just starting to work just a little bit better. And then of course it's actually tough to appreciate when you've just summited because you're just like in the thick of it, like the accomplishment. But as you get further and further away from the summit, you're able to kind of look back and think a little more sober-mindedly about what an accomplishment it was. So it's like the victory lap after winning a race. So I should have mentioned that oxygen, you typically use oxygen beginning right around 23,000 feet. So this mountain being just under 23,000 feet, no oxygen is recommended or required. One last question. Oh, wrap it up. Awesome. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Mayor Bailey. I also want to thank Johnny Carson and Debbie McMahon over there for all the entertainment. So thank you for that. And then next week, we're at the Dell. We have the City Ballet of San Diego, their resident choreographer and dancer, Jeff Gonzalez, is going to do the presentation. So go out, have a great Rotary week.